not here making the case that what I'm going to say to you today is going to like prove Mormonism or something like that. But what I'm going to say is that it's going to show you that we aren't just like coming out of nowhere here. In fact, I think the almost more remarkable thing is the coming forth of the Book of Mormon itself. Okay. I want people to imagine that they have to sit down and write like right now, you have to write eight pages of single space essay today. One draft, you just go for it. That's a challenge. That's something that's kind of tough to do. Now do that every single day for the next 2.5 months. Okay. So that's what Joseph did when he translated the Book of Mormon. This is a very well documented thing that happened. Okay. He produces this book that quickly in a single draft. And just some interesting facts about it. They've done sort of textual analysis on it. The book has 19 unique voices. It has 200 named characters with plausible Hebrew origins. So here are some names in it, for example. Himni, Chemish, Ammonihah, Mathoni, Nephi, Alma, Rabbana, Luram, Sam, Mulek, Paanchi, Pahoran, Korahor, Pakumena, Gideonhi. Those 12 names sound pretty ridiculous, right? Like, guys, somebody's just making that up. All of those names were discovered at different times in authentic ancient texts from that time in the Near East. These are authentic ancient names. There's a really interesting one. It talks about a guy named Mulek, who's the son of Zedekiah. Well, later archaeology shows that Zedekiah did have a son named Malchiah, and Mulek is a very plausible rendering. There's a shortened version of that name. It's like saying that he had a son named Michael, and then you find that the Book of Mormon says he had a son named Mike. Right?
Yeah. So just to be clear, the Book of Mormon recounts the happenings of ancient America.
Yes.
Right? And so what you're talking.
Yes and no. So people have a little bit of a. Let me do this real quick, just to give kind of the overview of what this book has in it. Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's important to understand even the point you're making here.
Yeah. And people make it. There's a lot of bad assumptions about the Book of Mormon that people make. They assume that it's like the story of all Native Americans that ever lived or something like that. And there have been members of the church who have had that opinion, even leaders of the church. But the text doesn't necessitate that sort of an interpretation. And so if you were to talk with the Latter-day Saint scholars who kind of understand the book well and have studied the text and really analyzed this, what it is, it's a library of complex storylines, but there's this overall story of a group of First Temple Israelites from the tribe of Manasseh fleeing the coming destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And they have essentially a miraculous journey where they end up in this foreign land, and that we now know as the American continent. And over time, these refugees become participants in the civilization of the ancient Americas, forming their own sort of ethno-religious group that they call Nephites. And they preserve this sort of messianic tradition of their forefathers on metal plates. And then what they do is they distinguish between their group and everyone else, calling themselves Nephi. I'll actually read Jacob, in Jacob 1:14 from the Book of Mormon. Jacob says, "I shall not distinguish them by their names, but I shall call them Lamanites that seek to destroy the people of Nephi, and those who are friendly to Nephi I will call Nephites." So, and by the way, if this has tons of ancient precedent. The Jews, everyone else were Gentiles. For the Greeks, everyone else were Babylonians. So this sort of a dichotomy is set up. And this book culminates in this messianic, the prophecies of this messianic tradition coming true with the Messiah appearing and ministering to this group of this tradition that is continued amongst the peoples of the ancient Americas. And then it ultimately ends with this group's downfall and the records being hidden. Now, at a certain level, people can think that this is crazy, but for a Christian who believes in the scattering of the house of Israel, this is sort of a biblical thing, right? To say that in that scattering, somehow a messianic tradition was preserved in some far off land, far from Israel. Again, maybe hard to believe, and I can see how people will say that, but also, it's not outside the realm of, if you're talking about the Exodus story and that kind of stuff, I don't think this falls outside of that
Noah
realm.
building a really large boat in order to, stay afloat a large mass of water for a considerable time. It's not unthinkable that people would potentially manage to sail to America.
Yes. And so the Christians that kind of laugh this off, and again, I always say, if you believe in the Bible and you take it seriously, there's no reason that you can't take this seriously as well. Another thing is, and you'll notice this, and anyone who reads it will notice it, the final rendering of the text of the Book of Mormon is clearly 19th century King James English. Now, that does not mean that the original people were talking like that. It's obviously in the vocabulary that was available to Joseph Smith.
Yes. So a few problems with that, though. Well, there are lots to say. I mean, you mentioned the Native Americans, which I think have an interesting relationship with Mormonism. But one straightforward thing is that the Book of Mormon seems to suggest that Native Americans descend from Israelites. They say that the Native Americans, the inhabitants of the Americas, were descended from that same Joseph who was enslaved in Egypt. Now, DNA evidence has shown that that's not the case. We know that Native Americans are not descended from Israelites, but the Book of Mormon says that they are. So, in the same way that you've got some interesting claims of Joseph Smith that are later shown archaeologically to be like, interesting, maybe some proof here, this seems to be something working in the opposite direction.
Probably the most common question